Today we are going to start going over some of the basics of what public relations is. And why this is really important to talk about is because most people, often even in the field of public relations, have a really hard time actually explaining and understanding what PR is. And the reason for that is because it's one of those fields that is as vast as you want it to be. People with degrees in public relations go into numerous disciplines. They go into so many different fields. They go into so many different types of business. So it can be a very generalized sort of thing, but it also can be very, very specific. There is a number of people who go into public relations that specialize in this one specific area. They just do event planning. They just do fundraising. There is going to be a unit we're going to do in a little bit, what is going to go through the actual fields of PR to kind of help give you a better sense of what it is. But to start off for this week, we're really just going to go through some of the terminology, go through some of the basic foundations of what PR is so that you have a better understanding of why it exists and why it is such a popular field of both study and why it's such a popular career out in the world. Now, I will fully acknowledge that public relations as a field has a really negative connotation for a lot of people, and truthfully, a lot of it is earned. We will see that in the next unit where we're going to look a bit at the history of PR. It has some really, really shady history. And admittedly, there are a lot of people today that use public relations simply to, manipulate people, or simply to spin the truth, or to simply do things that are really unethical, that we fully acknowledge there are people in the industry that do that. But there are some things that we can start by saying PR is not supposed to be. It is not lying, hype, and exaggeration. Instead, it's all about being honest and truthful and open with your audience. It is not about propaganda. This is something that has happened a lot in the history of PR, which we will get to, but it's not what the foundation of PR is. It's not about manipulation. It's supposed to be about being open and honest. It is not about keeping the public ignorant. It is not about hiding the truth. And one of the big things that we're going to talk about throughout the semester is why that is. It's not about keeping the public ignorant because that's not really something that can be done anymore. In the world of social media, in the world that we live in today where everything is interconnected, people are always going to find things out. And that's something we're going to talk about pretty extensively later on, especially when we start dealing with some of the issues that deal with like crisis control. Your audience is always going to find out the truth. So instead, it's about staying in front of the truth, making sure that you're not lying, making sure that you're not being shady. It is not about big companies and profits. Sometimes it can be, but a vast majority of people who go into the field of PR actually are working with small nonprofits or very small organizations. And then again, it is not about spinning the truth. It is about actually being truthful. So right now, you're probably more confused now than you were to start with. So let's actually look at what a definition of public relations actually is. According to the Public Relations Society of America, which is the professional organization that deals with PR professionals, they define public relations as a strategic communication process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics. This is basically a fancy way of saying PR is all about making sure organizations understand their public and their public understands the organization. It's about keeping an open line of communication between those people. It's about building trust. It's about building a reputation. It's about making sure the public truly understands and trusts the organization. And when we use the word organization, this can be anything. This can be an organization that's humongous, like Ford or Walmart or Shy Children's Hospital, but it can also be the local brewery or the food truck down the road or a nonprofit like the Literacy Volunteers. When we use the term organization, it can refer to absolutely anything. In fact, it can refer to you. Maybe you are a podcaster or you're a YouTuber. In that case, you're doing your own PR. You are the organization. So PR is making sure that those lines of communication are always open so the organization understands the public and the public understands the organization. So what are some easy ways we can think about how to define public relations? Public relations is about relationships. It's about building relationships. It's about earning trust. It's about establishing open communication. And it's about maintaining those relationships. Building the reputation is not nearly enough. You have to make sure that you maintain it. You have to maintain your reputation. You have to maintain that trustworthiness. Make sure that if something wrong does happen, how do you get them back? How do you convince your audience that this was a one-time thing? Or that, you take this crisis seriously? How do you make sure that they still continue to trust you? That is an example of how do you maintain that relationship and how do you rebuild your reputation. So this has really just been a very, very rough overview of what PR is. And I know for some of you, it still might be a little bit complicated because it seems like I've said a lot of stuff and some of it can even feel a little bit contradictory sometimes. And honestly, it's for two reasons. One, public relations, as we said, is very vast and very specific at the same time. You can focus on a specific field of PR, or you can just study it as a general thing. You can just work within the field of communication. But it's also very much in a state of flux. It's constantly changing, and we're seeing a massive shift happen really right now. And that it's also very interesting because in the next 5 or 10 years, PR might look different. And it's people, quite frankly, your age, that is really going to set the tone for what PR becomes in the future.